Captain Jiwan stood before the large screen in his ship's control room. The star map glowed with thousands of colored dots, each one representing a known world or system. But at one edge of the map, everything stopped. A huge empty space stretched across the display, marked only with red warning text: "Human territory, do not enter." Jiwan had been a ship captain for 20 years. He had visited many worlds and met dozens of alien races, but he had never been to human space. No one had. At least no one who came back to talk about it. "Captain," called Hyunwoo from his seat at the navigation controls, "the gravity readings are getting stronger. Something big is happening near the boundary zone." Jiwan walked over to look at the data. Strange energy patterns were showing up on their sensors. Whatever was causing them came from the direction of human space. "How long since anyone tried to cross into their territory?" asked Taejin, the ship's science officer. He was older than the others and had served on many different ships. 300 years, Jiwan replied. "The last group to try was a Thrakari battle fleet. 50 ships, all heavily armed. They sent one message after crossing the boundary, then nothing." Hyunwoo pulled up historical records on his screen. 17 different groups have tried to enter human space over the centuries. Military fleets, science expeditions, even trade missions. None ever returned. The bridge fell quiet. Everyone knew the stories. Some said humans were savage killers who destroyed anyone who entered their space. Others believed they had weapons so powerful that entire fleets could be wiped out instantly. A few thought maybe humans had all died out, leaving behind some automated defense system. "Sir," said Sunho from the communication station, "I'm picking up something strange." "What kind of strange?" Jiwan asked. "A signal. It's very faint, but it's coming from deep inside human territory." Sunho worked at his controls, trying to make the signal clearer. It's a mathematical sequence, repeating over and over. Taejin moved to help Sunho decode the message. After several minutes, he looked up with a worried expression. "These are coordinates, and there's a timestamp from 50 years ago." 50 years? Jiwan frowned. What ship was in that area 50 years ago? Hyunwoo checked the historical database. His face went pale. The Void Hunter. It was a Thrakari dreadnought, the most powerful warship ever built. They crossed into human space exactly 50 years ago. "If they're still transmitting, maybe they're still alive," suggested Minji, the ship's engineer. Sunho continued working on the signal. Finally, he managed to decode a longer message. When he read it aloud, everyone on the bridge felt a chill. "Day 847 in human space.
We are still alive.
The humans have not killed us. They have not captured us. We wish they had." The words hung in the air like a curse. What could be worse than death or capture? What had the humans done to the crew of the Void Hunter that made them wish for death? "Captain," said Minho, the weapons officer, "the council sent us to investigate these gravity readings. But if we get too close to human space, I know the risks," Jiwan said, but he also knew their duty. The strange gravitational waves were getting stronger each day. Soon they might start affecting nearby colonies. They needed answers. "Take us closer to the boundary," he ordered, "but keep us well outside human territory." As their ship, the Stellar Wind, moved toward the edge of known space, the crew watched their sensors carefully. The boundary itself was clearly marked, not by signs or barriers, but by the complete absence of anything. No ships, no signals, no debris. Just empty space. It's like a perfect sphere, Hyunwoo observed. Whatever keeps ships out, it works in 3 dimensions. They spent hours studying the boundary zone. The gravitational readings were definitely coming from the other side, but their sensors couldn't penetrate into human space. Every scan attempt simply returned empty data. Then Taejin made a discovery that changed everything. "Captain, look at this. The energy patterns we're seeing, they're not natural gravitational waves." "What do you mean?" Jiwan asked. "Someone is creating them on purpose. The patterns are too regular, too organized. This isn't some cosmic accident. Someone inside human space is doing this deliberately." The implications were frightening. If humans were causing the gravitational disturbances, it meant they had technology far beyond anything in the galactic databases. The official record said humans had only achieved spaceflight 4 centuries ago. They were supposed to be one of the youngest races in the galaxy. "Sir," Sunho called out, "I'm detecting more signals from inside human territory. Dozens of them. All very faint, all using different alien communication methods." "Different aliens?" Jiwan moved to the communication station. "You mean the missing expeditions?" "I think so. I can identify Thrakari patterns, Velkari codes, even some Kepler-born signals. They're all still broadcasting, but the signals are so weak it's like they're being filtered through something. As the crew processed this information, Engineer Minji noticed something troubling on her displays. Captain, the gravitational waves are getting stronger. Much stronger. If this continues, the nearby Zelen colonies could be in serious danger. Jiwon stared at the boundary of human space. Somewhere beyond that invisible wall, the crews of 17 expeditions were still alive after decades or even centuries. They were sending signals, but their messages suggested something worse than death awaited anyone who crossed into human territory. Yet the gravitational waves threatened innocent colonies. As a captain in the Galactic Defense Fleet, his duty was clear. He had to find the source of the disturbance and stop it before it caused widespread damage. "All hands prepare for boundary crossing," he announced over the ship's communication system. "We're going into human space." The bridge crew exchanged worried looks, but no one protested. They all knew what their duty required. As the stellar wind approached the invisible boundary, every sensor on the ship began registering impossible readings. Space itself seemed to bend and twist at the edge of human territory. Then as they crossed the line, everything changed. Their faster-than-light engines shut down completely. Long-range communications went dead. Even their quantum communication beacons, technology that was supposed to be impossible to block, fell silent. They were cut off from the rest of the galaxy, alone in the mysterious space that had swallowed 17 expeditions before them. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, something was watching. The silence was complete. For the first time in his career as a spaceship captain, Jiwon could not contact anyone outside his own vessel. The stellar wind drifted through human space like a leaf in an ocean, cut off from everything familiar. "Status report," Jiwon called out, trying to keep his voice steady. "All FTL systems offline," reported Minji from engineering. "The engines aren't broken, they just won't start. It's like something is blocking them from working." Sunho looked up from his communications panel with worry in his eyes. "No contact with command, no signals from the colonies, nothing. We're completely alone out here." Hyunwoo studied his navigation displays. "Captain, the strange thing is that everything else works fine. Life support, regular engines, sensors, they all work normally. It's just the advanced systems that have shut down." "Like someone wants us to stay but not leave," Taejin said quietly. Before Jiwon could respond, Minho called out from the weapons station. "Captain, ships approaching. Many of them." Everyone rushed to look at the main display. Dozens of contacts were appearing on their sensors, surrounding the stellar wind in perfect formation. But these weren't like any ships in the galactic databases. The human vessels were sleek and dark, their hulls seeming to bend light around them. They moved without any visible engines or energy signatures. Most disturbing of all, they appeared and disappeared on the sensors like ghosts, sometimes there and sometimes not. "Are they trying to communicate?" Jiwon asked. "Nothing," Sunho replied. "No signals of any kind. They're just watching us." The human ships maintained their positions around the stellar wind with impossible precision. When Hyunwoo tried a small course change to test their reactions, every human vessel moved at the exact same time, maintaining their formation perfectly. "How are they doing that?" Minji wondered. "There's no communication between their ships that I can detect." "Maybe they don't need to communicate," Taejin suggested. "Maybe they're all controlled by the same intelligence." Days passed in this strange standoff. The human ships never moved closer, never moved away. They simply watched and waited. The alien crew of the stellar wind tried everything they could think of to make contact. But the humans gave no response. Minho attempted to target the human ships with the stellar wind's weapons, just to see what would happen. The targeting system couldn't lock onto them. It was as if the ships existed in a different layer of reality, close enough to see but impossible to touch. "This is driving me crazy," Minho said after his third failed attempt. "They're right there, but our systems can't recognize them as real objects." "Maybe they're not entirely real," Taejin said. "At least not in the same way we are." On the fourth day, something changed. Hyunwoo was the first to notice it during his regular sensor sweep. "Captain, the human ships have moved closer." "Much closer." Jiwon looked at the display and felt his blood turn cold. The human vessels were now orbiting the stellar wind in complex patterns. Sometimes they seemed to pass right through parts of his ship without causing any damage. "That's impossible," Minji said, checking her engineering readings. Nothing can pass through solid matter like that. But the sensors didn't lie. The human ships were moving in three-dimensional patterns around and through the stellar wind, like they existed in multiple layers of space at the same time. They're studying us, Tejan realized. Just like we study interesting specimens in a laboratory, the thought made everyone uncomfortable. They were used to being the ones doing the studying, not being studied themselves. That night, as the crew tried to sleep despite their fears, Engineer Minji noticed something that made her heart race. The human ships were much closer now, close enough that she could see details of their construction through the viewports. The ships were not just advanced, they were beyond anything she had ever imagined. Their hulls seemed to be made of some material that flowed like liquid but held shapes like solid metal. Energy patterns moved through the hull material like blood through veins. "Captain," she called over the internal communications, "you need to see this." Jiwan arrived at the engineering section to find Minji staring out a viewport at a human ship that was floating just meters away. The vessel was easily 3 times the size of the stellar wind, but it made no sound and produced no heat signature. "Look at the hull patterns," Minji said, pointing. "Those energy flows, they're not powering the ship. They are the ship. It's like the entire vessel is one giant computer." As they watched, the patterns in the human ship's hull changed, becoming more complex. New designs appeared and disappeared in the flowing material. "It's learning," Jiwan realized, "watching us and learning about our ship." This thought was confirmed when Sunho made a horrifying discovery the next morning. While checking the communications equipment, he detected something that shouldn't have been possible. "Captain, I'm receiving our own transmissions back from the human ships." "What do you mean?" Jiwan asked. "Our internal communications, conversations we had yesterday, equipment checks from engineering, even personal logs. The human ships are transmitting them back to us. Perfect copies, but delayed by several hours." The implications hit everyone at once. The humans weren't just watching them, they were recording everything. Every word, every action, every piece of data from their ship systems was being copied and analyzed. "How is that possible?" Minho demanded. "Our communications are encrypted and shielded." "Not against this," Tejan said, studying the data. "Whatever technology they're using, it can see right through our shields and encryption as if they don't exist." Over the following days, the situation became more disturbing. The human ships began transmitting back not just their communications, but improved versions of them, conversations where their words were clearer, equipment readings that were more accurate than their own instruments could produce. "They're not just copying us," realized Hyunwoo. "They're making us better. Like they're running tests on improved versions of our technology." The most frightening discovery came when Taijin detected quantum patterns in the space around their ship. The patterns contained detailed information about their species, their homeworld, their technology, and even their biological functions. "They know everything about us," he reported to the captain. "Our DNA, our brain patterns, how our technology works, even how we think. It's like they've taken us apart and analyzed every piece." Jiwon stared out at the human ships that surrounded them. They had been in human space for over a week, and every day brought new evidence of technology so advanced it seemed like magic. "Sir," Sunho said quietly, "I've been analyzing those old signals from the missing expeditions. I think I understand now why they're still transmitting after so many years. Tell me, the humans aren't destroying the ships that enter their space. They're preserving them. Every crew, every vessel, every piece of technology, it's all still here somehow. Still functional, still transmitting, but changed." The crew fell silent as this reality sank in. They weren't going to be killed or captured in any normal sense. They were going to become part of something larger, something that would study them for decades or centuries while keeping them alive to provide information. As if responding to their growing understanding, the human ships began to move in new patterns, tighter formations, more complex movements. They were preparing for the next phase of whatever process had claimed 17 expeditions before them. The stellar wind was about to join a collection that had been growing for 300 years. The breakthrough came when Sunho detected something impossible. While monitoring the communication channels, he heard his own voice coming back from the human ships. Not a recording, his actual voice, speaking words he was saying at that exact moment. "Captain," he called out, his voice shaking. "They're transmitting my words back to me as I speak them. Right now in real time." Jiwon rushed to the communication station. Sure enough, Sunho's voice was coming through the speakers, delayed by only a few seconds. But the words were coming from ships that were hundreds of kilometers away. How is that possible? Jiwan asked, and his own voice echoed back from the speakers moments later. They're not just listening to us, Taejin realized, his face pale. They're inside our communication systems. Inside our ship's computers. Maybe inside our heads. The thought sent chills through the entire crew. If the humans could intercept their thoughts and words in real time, then nothing was private. Nothing was secret. Hyunwoo made another disturbing discovery while studying the sensor data. Captain, I've been analyzing the patterns of the human ship's movements. They're not random. Each ship is following a path that matches the flight patterns of different alien species. What do you mean? Jiwan asked. This ship here, Hyunwoo pointed to one of the human vessels, is moving exactly like a Thrakari dreadnought would move. That one over there is using Velkari navigation patterns. They're copying the flying styles of every species that has ever entered human space. The implications were staggering. The humans weren't just collecting ships and crews. They were learning to perfectly imitate every alien culture they encountered. But the real horror came when Taejin made his next discovery. While trying to understand how the human ships could exist in multiple dimensions, he found something in the quantum readings that made him sick with fear. Captain, you need to see this, he said, his hands shaking as he worked the controls. I've found traces of the missing expeditions. They're still here. Here? Where? Jiwan demanded. All around us. The quantum signatures show 17 different types of alien technology. All active, all functioning. But they're not separate anymore. They've been combined somehow. Taejin showed them the readings on the main screen. Complex patterns of energy flowed through the space around their ship, carrying the quantum signatures of dozens of different alien technologies all mixed together. The Void Hunter is still here. Taejin continued. So is the Celestial Wanderer, the Deep Explorer, all of them. But they're not separate ships anymore. They're part of something bigger. Minji studied the engineering readings with growing horror. It's like they've been absorbed into some kind of network. All their technology, all their knowledge, everything they knew, it's all been integrated into whatever the humans have built here. But what about the crews? Jiwan asked. The people on those ships? The answer came from an unexpected source. Sunho's communication equipment suddenly came alive with voices, dozens of them, all speaking at once in different alien languages. Day 2847 in the collection, said one voice in Thrakari. We understand now why we cannot leave. Cycle 156 of integration complete, said another in Velkari. Our knowledge has been processed and stored. The humans do not harm us, came a third voice in a language none of them recognized. They preserve us, forever. The voices continued, a choir of alien crews from different expeditions spanning 3 centuries. They were all still alive, still conscious but changed in ways the stellar wind crew couldn't fully understand. They're still themselves, Sunho realized, but they're also part of something larger. Like individual notes in a huge song, the human ships began moving in more complex patterns around the stellar wind. As they did, the alien voices became clearer, more organized. New specimens have arrived, the voices said in unison, now speaking in the common galactic language. Welcome to the collection. You will be preserved. You will be studied. You will contribute to the greater understanding. Understanding of what? Jiwan called out, though he wasn't sure if the voices could hear him. The threat that comes, they replied. The danger that approaches from beyond the galaxy. The humans prepare for what must be faced. Before anyone could ask more questions, the human ships stopped their orbiting patterns and took new positions. They were forming a corridor, pointing toward something deeper in human space. They want us to follow them, Hyunwoo said, reading the navigation displays. To where? Minyo asked, his hand moving instinctively toward the weapons controls. The answer came from the alien voices, now speaking with one unified consciousness. To the archive, where all knowledge is stored, where all specimens are preserved, where the true work is done. As the stellar wind was gently guided along the corridor of human ships, the crew saw something that defied all understanding. Ahead of them, space itself seemed to bend and twist, revealing structures that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. What is that? Minji whispered, staring at the impossible sight. A research facility, Taejin said, reading the sensor data with amazement. But it's bigger than most planets. And it's not entirely in our dimension. The structure ahead of them was vast beyond comprehension. Parts of it were clearly visible, made of the same flowing material as the human ships, but other parts seemed to fade in and out of existence as if they occupied spaces that human eyes couldn't normally see. How many expeditions did you say had disappeared in human space? Ji-won asked. 17. Hyunwoo replied. I'm reading hundreds of different quantum signatures from that facility, Taejin reported. Maybe thousands. If each signature represents a different ship or crew, the realization hit them all at once. The humans hadn't just been collecting the occasional expedition that wandered into their space. They had been gathering specimens from across the galaxy for much longer than anyone realized. Captain, Sunho said, listening to the increasingly complex choir of alien voices, I don't think those 17 expeditions were the beginning. I think they were just the most recent. As they approached the massive facility, more voices joined the chorus. Species they had never heard of, technologies they couldn't identify, knowledge from civilizations that might have disappeared from the galaxy centuries or millennia ago. The humans weren't just studying current galactic civilization, they were preserving the entire history of intelligent life in the galaxy, keeping every species, every discovery, every piece of knowledge safe from extinction. But safe for what purpose? What threat were they preparing to face? And what would happen to the crew of the Stellar Wind when they became part of this vast collection? The facility grew larger as they approached, its impossible architecture becoming more visible. Docking bays opened in its hull, bays that seemed to exist in several dimensions at once. Ready to receive their ship, all hands. Prepare for docking, Ji-won announced, though he had no idea what they would find inside the archive. The voices of 1,000 preserved civilizations welcomed them as the Stellar Wind entered the facility that held the accumulated knowledge of the galaxy, and somewhere in the depths of that vast structure, something was using all that knowledge to prepare for a threat that made their most advanced technology seem like primitive tools. The docking bay was unlike anything the crew had ever seen. The walls seemed to flow like water but felt solid to the touch. Patterns of light moved through the surfaces, creating designs that hurt to look at directly because they existed in more dimensions than their eyes could process. As the Stellar Wind settled into position, the bay sealed itself with no visible mechanism. Air filled the space around their ship, but it wasn't pumped in through vents. It simply appeared, as if the facility could create atmosphere from nothing. Life support is stable, Minji reported, though her voice carried confusion. But I have no idea how. The air composition is perfect for our species, but there's no way the humans should know what we need to breathe. Through the viewports, they could see movement in the bay. Shapes approached their ship, but they weren't the primitive bipedal humans from the galactic databases. These beings looked like patterns of organized light, maintaining human-like forms when they needed to interact with solid matter. Captain, Sunho called out, I'm receiving a direct communication request. Audio and visual. Put it through, Ji-won ordered. The main screen lit up with the image of a being that constantly shifted between looking human and looking like living mathematics. When it spoke, the words formed directly in their minds rather than coming through sound. Welcome to Archive 1, the being said. I am Archive Keeper Donghyun. We apologize for the deception, but understanding requires observation, and observation requires trust. Your species, like all others, would have reacted with fear to our true nature. What are you? Ji-won asked. You're not the humans from our databases. We were once, Donghyun replied. But evolution never stops, especially when guided by necessity. We became what we needed to become to fulfill our purpose. The being that called itself Donghyun led them from their ship through corridors that seemed to stretch in impossible directions. Other crew members from the Stellar Wind followed, their minds struggling to process the architecture around them. The facility exists in 17 different dimensional layers, Donghyun explained as they walked. Each layer is dedicated to studying different aspects of the species we have collected. They passed through chambers where the crew could see other aliens, beings from the missing expeditions. But these weren't prisoners or victims. They moved freely, worked on complex projects, and seemed to possess knowledge far beyond what their original species had achieved. The crew of the Void Hunter, Taejin whispered, pointing to a group of Thrakari who were working with energy patterns that defied physics. They look Enhanced. They have been given the choice to expand their consciousness, Dongyun said, to become part of something larger, while retaining their individual selves. Most choose to join our work. They entered a vast chamber where hundreds of different species worked together on projects that spanned multiple dimensions. Former enemies from different worlds collaborated on technologies that no single civilization could have developed alone. What is all this for? Jiwan asked. Another being approached them, this one introducing herself as Research Director Sojin. Her form resembled a living constellation, points of light connected by streams of energy. To answer that question, you must first understand what we have learned from our observations of the galaxy, Sojin said. Show them, Archive. The chamber around them changed, displaying a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. But this wasn't the galaxy they knew from their star charts. This map showed connections between worlds, energy flows between systems, and patterns that revealed the galaxy as a single living organism. Every species that achieves spaceflight follows predictable patterns, Sojin explained. They expand, they explore, they eventually achieve a certain level of consciousness and technological development. When they reach that level, they become visible. Visible to whom? Hyunwoo asked. The answer came from a presence that filled the entire chamber, a consciousness so vast that speaking with it was like trying to talk to a living planet. Archive Director Minjae's voice resonated from everywhere at once. To the entities that exist between galaxies, the beings that feed on civilizations like ours, they have consumed 17 other galaxies, leaving behind only empty space. They are drawn to consciousness itself, to the unique patterns of organized thought that mark intelligent life. The map changed, showing the space between galaxies. Dark shapes moved there, entities so massive that entire star systems would be insignificant to them. The crew watched in horror as the simulation showed these creatures consuming galaxy after galaxy, leaving nothing but cosmic dust. They're coming here, Minjae continued. We detected the first signs 3,000 years ago. They will arrive within the next century. 3,000 years? Jiwon gasped. But humans have only had spaceflight for 4 centuries. Another necessary deception, Dongyun said. Humans have been spacefaring for much longer than your records show. The first contact events in galactic history were carefully staged performances, designed to make us appear young and primitive while we studied your civilizations. The truth hit the crew like a physical blow. Every human diplomat, every human trader, every human tourist who had visited alien worlds had been gathering intelligence. For millennia, humanity had been building a comprehensive database of every species, every technology, every strength and weakness in the galaxy. But why the deception? Taejin asked. Because fear would have made cooperation impossible, Research Coordinator Jihoon explained, his form visible as a network of interconnected consciousness. If the galaxy knew what was coming, panic would have followed. Wars between species, the collapse of civilization, the waste of precious knowledge that we needed to preserve. The map showed the defensive preparations humanity had made. Hidden throughout the galaxy were structures and technologies that could manipulate reality itself, all powered by the combined knowledge of every species that had been collected. Each expedition that entered our space contributed something essential, Sojin said. The Velkari's ability to process spatial relationships, the Thrakari's advanced neural networks, the Kepler-born's natural adaptability. Every species has unique capabilities that add to our defensive capabilities. And our species? Minji asked. Your people have a natural ability to process quantum harmonics, Minji's vast presence replied. This ability is rare in the galaxy. With your knowledge integrated into our systems, we can complete the final component of the galaxy's defense network. The crew of the Stellar Wind stood in silence, processing the magnitude of what they had learned. The humans weren't the primitive newcomers everyone thought them to be. They were the galaxy's hidden guardians, preparing for a threat that would destroy everything if they failed. The choice your crew faces isn't just about yourselves, Jihoon said. Every day we delay is another day closer to the arrival of the entities. Your species' unique abilities could provide the final piece we need to save not just your worlds but every world in the galaxy. Captain Jiwon looked at his crew. They had entered human space expecting to find answers to some gravitational anomalies. Instead, they had discovered that the fate of galactic civilization rested on their decision. What happens if we refuse? He asked. You returned to your ship with your memories modified, Donghyun said. You remember finding only empty space where your instruments detected anomalies. You live out your lives never knowing how close extinction came. And if we agree, you become part of the archive. Your consciousness is expanded to comprehend realities your species was never meant to understand. You help us defend a galaxy that will never know it needed defending. Before anyone could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the facility. The beings around them moved with sudden urgency. What's happening? Ji-won demanded, Min-jae's presence filled with concern. Long-range sensors have detected something at the edge of the galaxy. The entities are closer than our calculations predicted. Much closer. The chamber's displays showed the galaxy's rim where space itself was beginning to unravel. Reality was breaking down as something vast and hungry approached from the darkness between stars. How long do we have? Taejin asked. Months, perhaps less, Min-jae replied. We need your species' abilities now. The defense network cannot be completed without them. The crew of the Stellar Wind faced their choice, knowing that the decision would determine not just their own fate, but the survival of everything they had ever known. Outside the facility, reality continued to deteriorate as ancient entities that fed on consciousness itself drew closer to their next meal. The facility shook as waves of distorted space-time washed over it. On the displays around them, the crew could see the edge of the galaxy being consumed by something that existed beyond the normal laws of physics. The entities feed on organized consciousness, Archive Director Min-jae explained, the vast presence's voice carrying notes of urgency. They consume the patterns of thought that make intelligence possible. When they finish with a galaxy, nothing remains that can think, dream, or create. Ji-won watched the displays with growing horror. Entire star systems were simply ceasing to exist as the entities approached. Not destroyed, erased as if they had never been there at all. How can we fight something like that? He asked. By becoming something they cannot consume, Research Director Sojin replied. The defense network we have built operates on principles of consciousness that exist outside their feeding patterns. But it requires the combined knowledge and abilities of every species in the galaxy. Archive Keeper Donghyun gestured, and the chamber around them changed to show the true extent of human preparation. Hidden throughout the galaxy were massive structures that looked like combinations of technology and living thought. Each one was powered by the preserved consciousness of different alien species. This is what we have built with the knowledge of the collected expeditions, Donghyun said. A network of consciousness-based defenses that can operate in multiple dimensions simultaneously. But there are gaps in our coverage. The displays highlighted areas of the galaxy where the defensive network was incomplete. Dark zones where the entities could break through and begin their consumption of organized thought. Your species' natural quantum harmonic abilities can bridge those gaps, Research Coordinator Ji-hoon explained. But we need willing participants, not forced subjects. The network requires conscious cooperation to function properly. Captain Ji-won looked at his crew. Each face showed the same mixture of fear and determination. They understood what was being asked of them, and what would happen to the galaxy if they refused. What exactly would happen to us? Hyunwoo asked. Your consciousness would be expanded beyond the limits of your physical forms, Sojin said. You would become part of the archive's collective intelligence, while retaining your individual personalities and memories. Think of it as joining a vast conversation that includes every species that has ever existed in this galaxy. To demonstrate, she connected them briefly to the communications of the other preserved crews. The voices they heard were clearly still the original beings, but enhanced with knowledge and capabilities far beyond their original species' limits. We are still ourselves, said the voice of the Void Hunter's captain, speaking in perfect galactic common. But we understand so much more now. The universe is far stranger and more wonderful than we ever imagined when we were limited to our original forms. The work we do here, added an engineer from a Kepler-born expedition, is more important than anything we could have accomplished in our old lives. We are building defenses for civilizations that don't even know they need defending. The facility shook again, more violently this time. Emergency lights began flashing as the archive systems registered the approach of something that defied all measurement. Decision time approaches, Min-jae announced. The entity's advance forces have reached the outer systems. We must activate the defense network within hours or lose our chance entirely. Engineer Min-jae stepped forward. If we join the archive, what happens to our ship? To our families back home? Your ship becomes part of the defensive network, Donghyun explained. Your families continue their lives, never knowing how close they came to extinction. If we succeed, the galaxy continues as it always has. If we fail, nothing will matter anymore. The crew members exchanged glances. Weapons Officer Minho was the first to speak. I've spent my whole career preparing to defend innocent people from threats. This is just a bigger threat than I expected. The research we could do, Taejin added. The knowledge we could gain, it would be worth more than 100 lifetimes of normal study. Navigator Hyunwoo nodded slowly. And if we don't help, there won't be anyone left to navigate anywhere. Communications Officer Sunho looked at the displays showing the approaching entities. I've been listening to the voices of the preserved crews for days now. They don't sound like prisoners. They sound like people who found a purpose bigger than themselves. Engineer Minji was quiet for a long moment, then said, My duty as an engineer is to build things that help people. This is the biggest construction project in the history of the galaxy. All eyes turned to Captain Ji-won. The decision was ultimately his, but he could see that his crew had already made their choice. The same choice that 17 expeditions before them had made when faced with the reality of what was coming. We'll do it, he said simply. The reaction was immediate. The archive systems came alive with new activity as they prepared to integrate the Stellar Wind crew into the defensive network. But before the process could begin, alarms sounded throughout the facility. What's happening now? Ji-won asked, Minji's presence filled with alarm. Long-range sensors detect a breakthrough at the Galactic Rim. One of the entity's advanced scouts has penetrated our outer defenses. It's heading directly for the core worlds. The displays showed a massive distortion in space-time moving through the galaxy at impossible speed. Wherever it passed, star systems simply stopped existing, not destroyed, not damaged, completely removed from reality as if they had never been. How long until it reaches the populated systems? Taejin asked. 6 hours, Minjae replied. Less if it accelerates. Then we need to integrate our crew now, Ji-won said. Whatever process you use, do it fast. Integration normally takes days, Sojin warned. Rushing it could damage your consciousness patterns permanently. And if we don't rush it, there won't be any consciousness patterns left to damage, Ji-won replied. The archive beings worked frantically to prepare the emergency integration systems. Around them, the facility's vast machinery hummed to life, powered by the combined consciousness of thousands of preserved civilizations. The process will be disorienting, Donghyun warned as the crew was led to integration chambers. You will experience memories and knowledge from every species in the archive. Try not to lose yourselves in the flood of information. As Ji-won lay down in his integration chamber, he felt the archive systems beginning to connect with his mind. The sensation was unlike anything he had ever experienced, like being plugged into the thoughts of an entire galaxy. Knowledge flooded through his consciousness. The history of civilizations that had risen and fallen millions of years before his species had evolved. Technologies that made their most advanced ships look like primitive boats. Art, music, literature, and mathematics from 1,000 different worlds. But through it all, he remained himself. Captain Ji-won of the Stellar Wind, now expanded to include the experiences of every being that had ever joined the archive's mission. Around him, his crew underwent the same transformation. Each became more than they had been while remaining exactly who they were. As the integration completed, they felt their consciousness merge with the archive's defensive network. Through quantum harmonic connections, they could sense every defense station hidden throughout the galaxy. Most importantly, they could feel the gaps in coverage that only their species' unique abilities could fill. Working together, they began bridging those gaps, extending the defensive network to cover every vulnerable point in the galaxy. The work was exhausting and exhilarating at the same time, requiring them to think in dimensions their original forms could never have comprehended. Network completion at 97%, Minjae announced. Entity Scout now 4 hours from core worlds. Will it be enough? Ji-won asked, though he already knew the answer through his connection to the archive's vast intelligence. We're about to find out, Sojin replied. Activating galaxy-wide defense systems now. Throughout the galaxy, hidden installations came online. The consciousness-based defenses created barriers of organized thought that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The network powered by thousands of preserved civilizations reached out to protect worlds that would never know they had been saved. The entity scout hit the defensive network like a wave hitting a seawall. For a moment, the outcome was uncertain. Then the creature that fed on consciousness encountered something it had never faced before, organized thought that existed beyond its ability to consume. The entity scout was stopped, confused for the first time in its existence across multiple galaxies. It had met something it could not devour. Alarms throughout the archive changed from warnings to celebrations as the defensive network held. The entity scout retreated, sending signals back to its masters that this galaxy was protected by something new, something they had never encountered before. "We did it," Yunwu said, his expanded consciousness still connected to every defense station in the galaxy. "The first victory," Minjae corrected. "The main entity forces will arrive soon and they will be prepared for our defenses. But we have bought time to strengthen our network and prepare new strategies." Captain Jiwan and his crew had become part of something larger than themselves. They were no longer just the crew of a single exploration vessel.